The Krex Empire had ruled the Andromeda Arm for 10,000 years, and their warships were the most feared in all of known space as captain. Vorthik stood on the bridge of his flagship, called the Decimator, while watching the star charts with 4 of his 6 eyes, and his chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the purple lights of the command center, because today was supposed to be just another routine patrol along the outer rim. His navigation officer clicked nervously and said that they were detecting an unknown vessel entering their space through sector 7-7-9, which made Vorthik's mandibles click in amusement as he thought about another primitive species stumbling into their territory, and ordered his crew to prepare the subjugation protocols. The view screen flickered to life and revealed a boxy and ungainly vessel that looked like someone had welded cargo containers together and strapped engines to them, while it bore markings in an unknown script that read, USS Pioneer, the communications. Officer reported that they were hailing them, and Vorthik told him to put them through because he wanted to see what manner of prey had wandered into their web. The screen shifted to show the interior of the alien vessel, where a bipedal creature with soft pink skin and only 2 eyes stared back at them, as it had fur only on top of its head and wore a blue uniform got Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth. Vessel Pioneer introduced himself and said they came in peace and sought diplomatic relations with their species, which made Vorthik's crew burst into clicking laughter because this soft and fleshy thing dared to speak to them as equals. Vorthik drew himself up to his full 3-meter height and responded that he was Captain Vorthik of the Krex Empire, and the humans had entered their space without permission, so they must surrender their vessel immediately, or they would take it by force. The human tilted its head slightly and said he was afraid they could not do that, because they were on a mission of exploration and diplomacy, and perhaps they could discuss this over something else, but was interrupted when Vorthik commanded his weapons officer to target their engines and fire a warning shot. A bolt of superheated plasma lanced out from the Decimator and was designed to pass just meters from the human vessel's hull, as it was a shot that had made 1,000 species surrender in terror. The human ship rolled to the side with surprising agility, and the plasma missed by a wider margin than intended, which made a female voice from off-screen tell Captain Morrison that they had fired on them. Jake Morrison's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted as he told Captain Vorthik that he would give him one chance to apologize for that unprovoked attack and discuss this like civilized beings. The bridge erupted in laughter. Again, because this tiny ship with its soft crew dared to threaten them, which made Vorthik order his crew to fire main cannons and disable their engines and prepare boarding teams. What happened next would be recounted in horror across the Krex Empire for generations as the human ship dove beneath the barrage of plasma fire and accelerated at rates that should have liquefied its crew while it twisted and spun through space, with movements that defied the Krex's understanding of physics, and then impossibly it returned fire. Simple kinetic projectiles, which were just chunks of metal, accelerated to fractional light speed, slammed into the Decimator's shields as the first few were absorbed, but the humans kept firing, and their primitive weapons came in an endless stream, with each impact weakening the shields further. Vorthik gasped that it was impossible and ordered his crew to increase power to shields and told all weapons to concentrate fire. But the human ship was no longer where they were aiming, because it had somehow appeared behind them while still pouring that relentless stream of kinetic death into their engines. His tactical officer shrieked that shields were at 30%, and they were targeting their weak points, and asked how they knew their weak points, which made Jake Morrison reappear on the view screen with an expression that was calm and almost sad. Morrison told Captain Vorthik to please stand down, because they did not want to destroy his ship, which made Vorthik roar that they cannot destroy a Krex battleship because they were the apex predators of the galaxy. Morrison quietly corrected. him and said they were the apex predators, and told Lieutenant Shawn to prepare a demonstration and target. Their weapons array only, which made the human ship suddenly split its fire into a dozen precise streams as each one found a weapon emplacement. With surgical precision, and in seconds, the pride of the Krex fleet was defenseless. Morrison explained that they had been analyzing their technology since they entered the system, and their shields were impressive, but they were designed for energy. Weapons, while kinetic impacts at relativistic speeds, were something they never prepared for, and their armor was strong but brittle, which was perfect for dispersing plasma but vulnerable to repeated impacts, and their engines were powerful but ran too hot, which made them easy to target with infrared sensors. Vorthic's 6 eyes were wide with shock as he asked how long they had been watching them, and Morrison said they had not been watching, but they had just gotten very good at rapid tactical analysis because humanity had been fighting wars for all of their recorded history, and they had gotten unfortunately efficient at it. The female voice came again and told the captain that the Pioneer's computer had finished analyzing their fleet movements in this sector, and they could disable their entire patrol group in approximately 4 minutes, which made Morrison hold up a hand and say that would not be necessary, before asking Captain Vorthic again if they could discuss this peacefully, because they truly did not want to fight, but if they forced them to fight. Then he shrugged, which was a uniquely human gesture that somehow conveyed both regret and inevitability. Vorthic looked at his crippled ship and his frightened crew and made a decision that would change galactic history as he quietly ordered them to stand down all weapons and open a diplomatic channel. As the 2 ships hung in space, neither species realized they were witnessing the first moment of a fundamental shift in the galaxy's balance of power, because the apex predators had just met something they had never encountered before, which was a species that had turned warfare into a science and diplomacy into an art, and somehow remained hopeful enough to try talking first, and the galaxy would never be the same. 3 months after first contact, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session as representatives from 47 species gathered in the great amphitheater on Nexus Station, and their forms were a riot of evolutionary diversity while insectoid. Krex sat next to crystalline shard dancers in the aquatic nebula. Swimmers floated in their mobility spheres beside the energy-based Futari. At the center of attention stood 2 humans who were Ambassador Lisa Park and her military-attached Colonel Dan Wright, and they looked almost comically small among the assembled aliens, but not a single representative dared to underestimate them anymore. High Chancellor Zrix of the Mokari Federation raised 3 of her tentacles for silence and said they had convened this emergency session to address the situation regarding the new species that called itself humanity. Warlord Kraxis of the Draken Hegemony growled and asked if she called it a situation when they dismantled a Krex battle fleet with a single scout ship and reverse-engineered Futari shield technology in a week and turned their own weapons against them, because this was not a situation but an invasion. Lisa Park stepped forward, and her voice carried clearly through the chamber's translators as she said with respect to Warlord Kraxis that they had invaded no one, and every military action humanity had taken had been in self-defense. Kraxis stood, and his 2.5-meter frame bristled with scales as he asked if she called sending spy probes to every inhabited system self-defense. Colonel Wright said calmly that they called it prudent reconnaissance, and those were not spy probes, but cultural exchange satellites that broadcast their history and art and scientific knowledge to anyone who wanted to receive it. The ethereal voice of a Futari representative chimed and said their history was nothing but warfare with conflict after conflict and weapons growing ever more destructive, and they glorified violence. Lisa and Dan exchanged a look that the assembly would later learn to recognize as humans. About to be frustratingly reasonable, Lisa admitted that their history was violent, but that was precisely why they were here seeking peace, because they had learned from their mistakes and every war taught them something which was not just how to fight better, but why fighting should be the last resort. Chancellor Zrix leaned forward and simply said to explain. Dan Wright activated a holographic display and said that on Earth they had a saying which was, if you want peace, then prepare for war, and it sounded contradictory, but it had kept their planet from destroying itself for over a century because they maintained strength not to conquer, but to deter. The hologram showed Earth's history, including world wars and nuclear standoffs, and tense peace treaties. Lisa continued and said, they had come close to extinction multiple times, but each time they pulled back, and they learned and they developed international laws and treaties and peacekeeping forces, and they turned their aggression into competition, like sports and business and scientific races, and they learned to channel their nature rather than be ruled by it. Ambassador Valex of the Centauri Collective fluttered her wings skeptically and asked what they meant by channel their nature when their ships carried weapons that could sterilize planets. Dan said yes simply, and added that they had never used them, and that was the point, because they carried the biggest stick precisely, so they did not have to swing it. Craxus roared that they did swing it and told them to ask the Crex. Lisa corrected him and said they disabled their weapons, and they did not destroy a single ship or kill a single crew member, and asked them to compare that to the Crex's standard first contact protocol, which involved immediate subjugation or destruction. Murmurs rippled through the assembly because many species had suffered under Crex's diplomacy. The mechanical voice of a synthesis unit intoned that they spoke of peace, yet their tactical capabilities exceeded anything in known space, and their analysis indicated their species dedicated 47% of its intellectual resources to military applications. Dan smiled grimly and said actually it was closer to 60% if they counted dual-use technologies, but here was what they were missing, because human military research had given them GPS navigation and internet communication and advanced medical techniques and weather satellites and countless other civilian applications, and they were very good finding peaceful uses for military technology. Lisa added that the best warriors were those who understood what they were fighting for, and Earth's military academies did not just teach tactics, because they required history and philosophy and ethics and cultural studies, and their generals quoted poetry, and their admirals studied alien psychology, and their soldiers learned the languages of planets they might never visit. Chancellor Zrix's tentacles waved thoughtfully as she said they claimed to be peaceful, yet they had already established defensive pacts with 12 species, including 3 that were previously hostile to each other, and they were building a military alliance. Lisa corrected her and said they were building a community defense network, which was a big difference, because every member maintained sovereignty and forces were integrated, but not unified, and she asked them to look at the results because piracy in those sectors had dropped to 0, and trade had increased by 300%, and 3 border disputes had been resolved without a shot fired. Craxus accused them and said it was because everyone was terrified of them. Colonel Wright stepped forward and asked if the warlord was terrified, and pointed out that his species was 3 times their size, with natural armor and centuries more spacefaring experience, and asked if he was really afraid of humans, or if he was afraid of losing his position as the sector's dominant military power. The Draken warlord's scales flushed purple with rage, but he said nothing. Lisa addressed the entire assembly and said here was what humanity offered, as they would share their defensive technologies and help establish trade routes safe from piracy, and mediate disputes not through force, but through negotiation, and teach what they had learned from their bloody history, so others did not have to repeat it. Chancellor Zrix asked what they wanted in return. Lisa said simply that they wanted to learn about their technologies and cultures and histories, because humans were curious by nature, and they had spent so much time fighting each other that they were desperate to find out what else was possible, and asked them to show them how to be better. The Lex asked pointedly if she meant better at war. Dan replied that they meant better at everything, because war was just applied physics and logistics and psychology, and the same skills that made them good at warfare made them good at engineering and medicine and art and diplomacy, and they did not want to be the galaxy's police force, but wanted the its students. The assembly fell silent until finally the ancient voice of Elder Thyma of the Archive Worlds spoke for the first time in a decade and asked if they would share their military knowledge freely. Lisa admitted not freely, but in exchange for membership in the Galactic Council with all the responsibilities that entailed, and they would follow their laws and contribute to their sciences and defend their members. But they would not be subordinate to any single power. Thyma observed that they sought to change the balance of power. Dan said they sought to make power irrelevant, because when everyone was strong, then no one needed to be afraid. And when no one was afraid, then real progress became possible. Warlord Craxus stood again and said those were pretty words, but asked what happened when they decided the galaxy would be better under human rule. Lisa and Dan shared another look, and this time it was Dan who spoke with his voice carrying the weight of Earth's history, as he said. Then they hoped the friends they had made, and the alliances they had built, and the weapons they had shared would be used to stop them, and that was why they were not keeping secrets, because an armed galaxy was a free galaxy. Zrix asked, amazed, if they would arm their potential enemies. Lisa said they would rather turn potential enemies into actual allies. But yes, because the alternative, which was one species dominating through superior firepower, led nowhere good, and they had seen that movie, and it did not end well for anyone. The debate continued for hours, but the seed was planted because humanity was not offering conquest or protection, but was offering partnership, and for a galaxy that had known only hierarchies of power, it was a revolutionary concept. As the session concluded, Elder Thyma approached the human delegates and said their species was young, but perhaps that was what they needed, because old species became set in their ways and they offered disruption. Lisa agreed and called it creative destruction and said it was kind of their specialty. Thyma mused and said let them hope that they remembered the creative part. As delegates filed out, while arguing and debating, the humans stood together in the vast chamber, as they were still the smallest species present and still the newest, but they had just shifted the entire galaxy's perspective on power and cooperation and the future. The derelict drifted through the cosmic void between galaxies, and it was a monument to engineering that predated most civilizations. Recorded history, as it was massive with a sphere of unknown metal 40 kilometers in diameter that was scarred by eons of micrometeorite impacts, but fundamentally intact. The joint exploration team that found it consisted of beings from 6 species, but it was the humans who insisted on investigating. Commander Talik of the Krex muttered as the survey ship approached the ancient vessel that this was why they needed them to stop poking things, because the galaxy was peaceful before they arrived. Captain Amy Rodriguez replied while studying the sensor readings that peaceful was relative, and this thing had been sending out a weak signal for who knows how long, and they just happened to have the equipment sensitive enough to detect it. Talik pointed out that it was equipment they developed for military reconnaissance. Chief Science Officer Ben Carter corrected absently that it was multi-purpose technology, while his attention was fixed on his displays and the same sensors that found this also located 3 inhabited planets in need of humanitarian aid last month. The team included representatives from the Fotari and the Mokari Federation and the Archive Worlds, and the newly formed Human Centauri Tech Exchange, and it was a testament to how much had changed in the 2 years since humanity's arrival that such a diverse group could work together. The Fotari scientist named Luminux reported that energy readings were strange, and the structure appeared to be in a state of quantum flux as it was existing but not existing and dormant, but aware. Amy said that was poetic and asked Ben what that meant in practical terms. Ben said slowly that it meant this thing was scanning them just as much as they were scanning it, and he thought it was waking up. Lights began to flicker across the derelict's surface, not randomly, but in clear patterns showing mathematical sequences, like prime numbers, then Fibonacci, then something more complex that the ship's computers could not immediately identify. Scholar Vess from the Archive Worlds whispered that it was trying to communicate, and this was first civilization technology, and they were actually seeing first civilization technology. Amy asked what the first civilization was. Vess explained excitedly that they were the theorized progenitor species who supposedly seeded the galaxy with life billions of years ago, then vanished, and most scholars thought they were myth. Ben announced that myth was hailing them, and their translation software was having a seizure trying to parse it. What came through the speakers was not words, but concepts delivered directly to their minds through some form of technological telepathy, saying guardians were sleeping in danger, approached and catalyst detected, and humans were interesting, and an unexpected variable and awakening protocols were initiated. Amy asked while rubbing her temples against a sudden headache if everyone else heard that. Talek complained that he heard it, and it was still echoing in his carapace. The derelict began to change as its surface rippled like liquid and revealed weapons arrays and sensor clusters that made their most advanced technology look primitive, but more concerning were the other signals, now appearing on their screens, which were dozens of them scattered across the galaxy and all beginning to wake up. Ben said urgently that they needed to warn the Council, because whatever these things were, they were not just here, but everywhere. Before Amy could respond, the mental voice returned stronger, now saying the enemy stirred beyond the rim and the harvest. Approached and guardians were insufficient, and new factors were required, and humans showed promise, and testing commenced. A beam of energy lanced out from the derelict and enveloped their ship as every system screened alarms, but no damage registered, and instead data flooded their computers with star charts showing regions beyond known space and technical specifications for technologies beyond their comprehension, and images that chilled every crew member to their core. Ships made of living metal and corrupted flesh, if they could be called ships, were each the size of a moon, and swarms of them consumed entire systems while leaving nothing but void in their wake, and they were moving slowly but inexorably toward the galaxy. Scholar Vess breathed in horror that they were the devourers, and the legends were true because the first civilization did not abandon them but had been standing guard. Amy concluded that now they were waking up their defense systems, but asked why contact them and why humans specifically. The answer came in another flood of concepts, saying adaptation and innovation, and aggression tempered by cooperation and warriors who chose peace and necessary paradox, and they had 60 cycles to prepare, and guardians would test, and those who passed would lead, and those who failed would fall, and unity or extinction. The being released them, and the derelict began to move, while accelerating impossibly fast toward the galactic core as their sensors tracked dozens more following similar trajectories. Talek said quietly that 60 cycles, if their time measurement was similar to theirs, was something. Ben finished and said 5 years, and they had 5 years before something very bad arrived. Amy was already composing messages to Earth and the Galactic Council, and told them to get them back to Nexus Station at maximum speed and send out priority alerts to every human ship to recall them for emergency briefing. Talek observed that she was mobilizing for war. Amy corrected and said she was mobilizing for survival, and not just humanity's, because that thing said unity or extinction, and it was going to take everyone, including Krex and Human and Fatari, and everyone working together to face whatever was coming. As their ship raced back towards civilized space sensors detected more ancient systems activating across the galaxy. including defense platforms and shipyards and facilities, whose purposes they could not even guess at as the first civilizations. Contingency plan that was dormant for eons was finally activating, and they had chosen humanity as their wild card. Bang wondered aloud why them, and asked of all the species in the galaxy, why did they react to humans? Amy said grimly that it was because they were the only species that had gotten very good at turning existential threats into unity and Earth united only after they nearly destroyed themselves. And maybe that was what they detected, which was a species that knew how to set aside differences when extinction was on the line. Talek added, with what might have been respect, that they recognized predators who had learned to be protectors, because the Devourers consumed and the Guardians defended, but humans adapted and took the enemy's strength and turned it against them. Amy said they should hope that was enough, while watching the tactical display fill with awakening ancient systems, because ready or not the test had begun. Back on Nexus Station, the Galactic Council would soon receive the most terrifying and important message in its history, as the galaxy's newest species would have to convince 47 others to trust them with technologies and strategies that could save or doom them all. The real challenge was not the approaching Devourers, but forging a unity that had never existed before with humanity as the unlikely catalyst. The sleeping giants had awakened, and they brought with them a simple message which was evolved together, or die alone, and the countdown to the harvest had begun. 3 years had passed since the Guardian's warning, and Nexus Station had transformed from a diplomatic center into the largest military-industrial complex in galactic history, as species that had been enemies for millennia now worked side by side, and at the center of it all were the humans not as conquerors, but as coordinators. Admiral Jack Coleman stood in the Strategic Command Center surrounded by holographic displays showing the galaxy's defense preparations, while his staff included beings from every major species, which was a sight that would have been impossible before humanity's arrival. He commanded them to report. Commander Zara Okafor reported that the shield grid was at 67% completion, and the Photari energy web technology, integrated with their kinetic barriers, was exceeding projections, and they might actually be able to stop a Devourer planet killer. General Kraxus, who was the same Draken who had once called humans invaders, grumbled that might was not good enough and told them to show him certainty, as he now wore the insignia of the Combined Defense Force. Jack replied that certainty was HFY luxury they did not have, but he would take might over definitely dead, and asked, what about the fleet? A crystalline shard dancer chimed in with their harmonics, translating to speech, and said hybrid vessel production was ahead of schedule, with human adaptability merged with Krek's firepower and Mokari shields in their computational matrices, and each ship was a testament to cooperation. Captain Elena Vasquez added from her posting at the shipyards that it was a nightmare to coordinate, and asked them to try getting human engineers and Centauri craftsmen to agree on anything, because yesterday's argument about bolt threading nearly caused an interspecies incident. Jack noted that they were working together, and that was what mattered. The real miracle was not the technology, but the cooperation, as humans had done what no species before them had managed, which was they had made themselves indispensable not through force, but through facilitation, and they were the translators, and the mediators, and the ones who could find common ground between a hive mind and rugged individualists. A young ensign interrupted and said Guardian Probe 7 was requesting direct communication with him. Jack nodded, because the Guardians had been testing them relentlessly with combat trials and puzzle challenges and ethical scenarios, and humanity had passed most and failed some and learned from all. The probe materialized as a hologram, with its form shifting constantly, as if unable to decide on a single shape, and when it spoke, it used actual words. Now, instead of concept dumps having learned to communicate more effectively, the Guardian asked, Admiral Colvin if the time approached and final test parameters were being initialized, and if their forces were ready. Jack answered honestly that they were as ready as they could be, though he suspected they already knew that. The Guardian agreed, and said they knew their military preparedness, but the final test was not what they expected, because the Devourers were not merely a physical threat, but were entropy given form and destruction personified, and to defeat them required more than weapons. Craxus growled and asked if they were giving riddles again, because they needed strategies not. Philosophy. The Guardian turned to the Drakon General and said he still did not understand, but the humans did, and asked him why they succeeded where other species failed, because it was not through superior firepower, since many species outgunned them, and not through numbers, since they were few. So what was their advantage? Talek offered from her position that they were insane, because they saw impossible odds and thought. Challenge accepted. The Guardian said that was close, and explained that they transformed conflict into cooperation and weakness into strength, and enemies into allies, and this was why they were chosen as catalysts, and the final test would require this transformation on a galactic scale. Before anyone could respond, alarms began screaming, as every sensor in the system lit up as space itself seemed to tear open at the galactic rim. Zara breathed that they were early, and the Devourers were 2 years early. The tactical display showed the nightmare made real, as bioships the size of small moons emerged from wounds in spacetime, and immediately began to consume everything in their path, including asteroids and space dust, and even light itself seemed to bend toward their hungry maws. Jack commanded all stations to red alert, and said this was not a drill, and told them to implement Fortress Protocol, and get him a channel to every fleet commander now. The Guardian said calmly as chaos erupted around them that this was the test, and not the Devourers themselves, but how they faced them, and asked if they would fracture into competing factions, with each trying to save themselves, or would they prove that unity could overcome entropy. Jack did not have time for philosophical discussions, as he was already coordinating with thousands of ships and millions of beings, all looking to humanity for leadership they had never asked for, but could not avoid. He told Elena to activate the hybrid fleet, and told Craxus he needed his shock troops ready for boarding actions, and told Zara to bring the shield grid online, because he did not care if it was not finished, and they needed what they had. Someone reported that the outer colonies were in danger, and the Devourers were heading straight for them with estimated time to contact being 47 hours. Jack said then they had 47 hours to show the universe what unity looked like. And he turned to the communication officer and told them to open a channel to every inhabited world and every ship and every station with maximum priority. When the channel opened, Jack spoke not as a human admiral, but as a representative of all life in the galaxy. He addressed citizens of the galaxy and identified himself as Admiral Colvin of the Combined Defense Force, and said the moment they had been preparing for had arrived, because the Devourers were here, and they were coming for everything they had built and everything they were. He continued that 3 years ago, humanity arrived in their galaxy as strangers, and they called them warriors and invaders and disruptors. And they were not wrong, but they were also something else, which was survivors, and they had learned that survival was not about being the strongest or the smartest, but about adapting and cooperating and never giving up. He said today he was not asking them to fight for humanity, but asking them to fight for each other, because every species brought something unique to this battle, as the Krex brought fury, and the Photari brought energy manipulation, and the Mokari brought tactical brilliance, and the Shard Dancers brought computational power, and yes, humans brought their stubborn refusal to accept defeat. He explained that alone each of them would fall, but together they were something the Devourers had never faced, which was a galaxy, united not by conquest, but by choice, because they consumed what the galaxy created, and they destroyed but the galaxy. Protected, and they were entropy, but the galaxy was evolution. He commanded all ships and all worlds and all beings that this was their stand, not as separate species, but as one galactic civilization. And today they forged their future in the fires of this conflict. And today they proved that unity was not just a word, but a weapon against the darkness. He finished by telling everyone to go to battle stations and show these cosmic locusts what happened when they tried to eat a galaxy that fought back. The channel closed to a moment of silence, then erupted in confirmations from across the galaxy. As ships powered up and weapons charged and billions of beings prepared for war. The Guardian observed it all with its form, finally settling into something almost like approval, and said it was interesting that they reframed annihilation as opportunity and called it very human. Jack said it was what they did because they were really good at finding hope in hopeless situations, and asked if they were going to help them fight or just grade their performance. The Guardian replied, both, and said the weapons they had provided and the technologies they had shared were tools, but the true weapon against the Devourers was what they were building right now, which was unity forged in crisis and diversity wielded as strength. And this was what the first civilization discovered too late, and perhaps they would succeed where they failed. As the first long-range engagement began with hybrid ships, using tactics no single species could have developed alone, Jack allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction because they had turned the galaxy from a collection of competing powers into something new, which was a functioning if chaotic united front, and the Devourers were expecting easy prey that was separated and weak, but instead they were about to face something unprecedented, which was a galaxy that had learned humanity's greatest trick of turning certain defeat into just another problem to solve together, and the battle for survival had begun, but the war for unity was already being won. The Battle of Terminus Point would be remembered as the moment everything changed, not because it was where the Devourers were defeated, since that would take months more of brutal fighting, but it was remembered as the moment the galaxy transcended its limitations. 6 months into the war, the combined defense force had learned painful lessons because the Devourers adapted to every strategy and consumed energy weapons and regenerated from kinetic damage, and for every victory the galaxy paid in destroyed worlds and billions of lives. Captain Sam Cooper stood on the bridge of the CSV, Unity's Dawn, which was humanity's first truly integrated warship, and her crew included 60 species working in perfect synchronization, with their differences becoming advantages. Her Mokari tactical officer reported that Devourer Hive Beta was approaching Terminus Point, and if they broke through, there was a problem. Sam finished the sentence and said they would have a straight path to the core worlds, and she knew and told them to signal the fleet because Operation Synthesis was a go. This was humanity's ultimate contribution, which was not weapons or tactics, but an idea so audacious that even their allies had called it insane, because if the Devourers could adapt, then the galaxy needed to evolve faster than they could consume. Her communications officer said Admiral Coleman was requesting final confirmation, and once they began, there was no going back. Sam looked at her mixed species crew, with each wearing the new bio-neural interfaces humanity had developed with Guardian technology, and asked if anyone wanted to live forever as separate species in a dead galaxy. The response was unanimous, with clicks and chimes and growls and human voices all expressing the same sentiment, which was better to evolve together than die apart. Sam commanded them to initiate the link across the fleet and across the galaxy. Billions of beings activated their neural interfaces simultaneously, not to create a hive mind, since humanity had been adamant about preserving individuality, but to create something new, which was a network of consciousness where thoughts could be shared and experiences exchanged and knowledge instantly transferred. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Abi, Krek's warrior, suddenly understood Futari. Energy manipulation, not intellectually but instinctively, and the human engineer grasped. Shard dancer mathematics as if born to it, and Mokari battle meditation. Merged with human adrenaline responses, and every strength of every species became available to all. But more than that, they began to understand each other because fear felt the same whether you had chitin or skin, and hope resonated across every form of consciousness, and love and loss and determination were emotions that drove them and were universal, just expressed differently. Someone reported that Hive Beta was entering weapons range, but Sam was not sure who anymore, as her awareness expanded to encompass her entire crew, then her ship, then the fleet. She told all vessels to implement evolution protocol and show them what unified diversity looked like. What followed defied every tactical doctrine ever written, as ships moved in patterns that required human intuition and Krex aggression and Centauri precision and Mokari foresight to execute, while weapons fired in harmonics only Shard dancers could calculate, and were powered by Photari energy manipulation and targeted with human pattern recognition. The Devourers for the first time hesitated because their adaptive algorithms could not process an enemy that changed fundamentally with each passing second. Elena Vasquez reported from her dreadnought that they were confused in their consumption. Matrix could not lock onto their energy signatures because they were fluctuating too rapidly between different species' baseline frequencies. Sam grinned and said then they should really mess with them, and told all ships to execute Maneuver Chaos Symphony. The fleet moved as one organism with 1,000,000 independent parts, as each ship flew patterns from their species' instincts, including human unpredictability and Draken predator strikes and Mokari flowing water tactics, but coordinated through the shared consciousness to create something entirely new. The Devourers tried to adapt, but how could they adapt to chaos given purpose? And how could they consume unity that maintained diversity? Guardian probes throughout the battle zone activated, and their ancient weapons joined the fight, but more importantly, they began broadcasting something new, which was approval and recognition, and data streams that enhanced the neural link network. The combined consciousness of the galaxy felt the Guardians' message, which was that they had passed the test, because they had achieved what the first civilization could not, which was unity without uniformity and strength through diversity, and they had proven that evolution was not about becoming the same, but about becoming more together than they could be alone. The Devourers' assault faltered as they encountered something unprecedented, which was prey that evolved faster than they could adapt, and unity that grew stronger with each attack, and diversity that turned their consumption into poison. Sam felt the moment when the tide turned as across the galaxy, every species contributed their unique gift to the whole. Wow. Photari turned Devour energy attacks into fuel for their own weapons, and Krex berserker charges were guided by Mokari tactical meditation, and human creativity found new applications for every alien technology, and Shard dancers computed firing solutions that should have taken years in microseconds. The Devourer Hive Beta began to retreat, but not in an organized withdrawal, because something was wrong with them as their bioships shuddered and convulsed, and their perfect adaptation mechanisms turned against them. Through the neural link asynthesis, units shared their analysis and explained that the Devourers could not process their quantum signatures because they were simultaneously one and many and united, and diverse and ordered and chaotic, and the paradox was causing cascade failures in their consumption matrices. Admiral Coleman's voice reached across the link from his command ship and said, "All forces should press the advantage, but remember they were not trying to destroy, but to protect, and not to conquer, but to preserve and show the universe that unity was stronger than entropy." The battle raged for hours, but it was no longer a desperate defense, because it had become something else entirely, which was evolution in action, as the galaxy learned and adapted and grew stronger with each passing moment, while the Devourers grew weaker and more confused. When the last Devourer bioship fled back through the dimensional tiers, they had created the assembled fleet did not cheer, because through the neural link they all felt the weight of what had just happened, and they had changed and become something new, and there was no going back. Guardian Probe Prime appeared before the assembled fleet, and its form was no longer shifting, but had settled into something that radiated ancient satisfaction. The Guardian spoke, and this time its words resonated through both technology and this neural link. As it said, the test was complete, and they had succeeded where the first civilization failed, because the first civilization tried to face the Devourers through pure technology and unity of thought, but they succeeded through diversity of spirit and unity of purpose. It continued that the Devourers would return, because they always returned, but now the galaxy had the tools to face them, and more importantly, they had each other, and the neural link was not mandatory, and those who wished could disconnect, but the knowledge and understanding they had gained would remain. Sam asked what happened now. The Guardian replied that now they grew and explored and built and lived, because the first civilization's greatest mistake was preparing for war so thoroughly they forgot to prepare for peace, and it told them not to make the same error, and the Guardians would remain and watch and assist, but the galaxy's future was in their own hands, or claws, or tentacles, or whatever appendages they preferred. As the fleet began to disperse, Sam noticed something beautiful happening, because ships were not returning to separate territories, but were forming mixed squadrons, and human vessels flew alongside Krex warships, and Photari energy dancers wove between Mokari tactical cruisers, and former enemies were becoming permanent allies. On Earth, the news of victory was met not with celebration, but with quiet determination, as humanity realized their role in the galaxy had fundamentally changed, because they were no longer the new species trying to find their place, but were the bridge between worlds and the translators of difference and the catalysts of unity. Lisa Park, who is now Secretary General of the Galactic Council, stood before the assembled representatives and said they had won more than a battle, because they had proven that diversity was not weakness, but strength, and that cooperation was not surrender, but evolution. And now came the hard part. She explained that they had to build a galaxy where the neural link was not needed for unity, and where species worked together by choice, not necessity, and where the weapons they had built for war would be turned to exploration and construction, and where the fear that had united them would be replaced by hope. The years that followed would be remembered as the golden age of expansion, as species that had never left their home systems joined. Mixed exploration fleets and technologies that had been hoarded were freely shared, and the galaxy grew not through conquest, but through cooperation. Humanity's role evolved, too, as they became the eternal mediators, and the species that others turned to, not for military might, but for the ability to find common ground, and their greatest weapon had never been tea.